My name's John Bracken. I work at the Knight Foundation. And I'm going to take a little, every now and then, foundation people can take the prerogative a little bit. And this week has been a very special week for us at Knight Foundation, in particular those of us on the journalism and now media innovation teams. I want to, again, be selfish for a minute and do two things. One, introduce the new program officer for journalism at Knight Foundation, Marie Gillot, who's down here in the front. She's been with us for 2 years and just got a promotion. And very exciting for all of us at Knight, and I think for anyone who knows her and her work, Shazna Nessa joined us this week as our Director of Journalism at Knight Foundation. So I just wanted to selfishly say that. The other thing that us foundation people can do when we're feeling selfish is announce and highlight some of the projects that we've just invested in. And highlight some of the panels that we're sponsoring here tomorrow. This morning, we announced 3 grants focused on driving design thinking into newsrooms. We made a grant of $200,000 to WLRN, the public radio station in Miami, to work with design thinking and in the newsroom. We helped kick off a new experiment from the New School in New York, led by Heather Chaplin, to create a school of design and journalism at the New School, which is very exciting. And we also, last but not least, announced a $3.6 million grant to the design school at Stanford to drive innovation thinking into media organizations and civic organizations. So we're really excited about that too. And this is the plug, and this will be my final plug. Tomorrow in this room at 10 a.m., Heather from the New School, Justin from the D School, and Knight Foundation's very own Shazna Nessa will be in here talking about design thinking in journalism, what it means, and what these projects are thinking of doing with it. Lastly, I get to introduce my friend and also Knight grantee and also fellow Chicagoan, Anne-Marie Lipinski. I asked a couple of colleagues of hers what I should say to highlight her work. She leads the Nieman Lab for the handful of you and all the work at Nieman Foundation, for those of you that don't know. But one thing I can say is when she invites you to dinner, don't say no. The last time she invited me to her home for dinner, we couldn't make it. I think my daughter had a tantrum or some family thing popped up, and we didn't go. And we missed the president stopping by the picnic she was running. So pro tip, when Anne-Marie invites you to a meal, accept. And with that, I'll get off stage and turn it over to you guys.
Thank you, John. What a great crowd. The headline in our lead story at Nieman Lab on May 15th did not equivocate. The leaked New York Times innovation report is one of the key documents of this media age, it read. The report, which was first posted on BuzzFeed, has been downloaded over 1 million times. Even Nieman's summary story has had almost 400,000 page views. The sustained interest, which is obviously underscored by your presence in this room today, is in some measure a reflection of our constant interest in the internal machinations of one of the world's great news organizations. But more relevant, I think, is the extent to which the report was a mirror in which so many of our news organizations could see their own reflections. And not only news organizations, it turns out, since the report was published, the Times has had a steady stream of visitors from the museum world, from the library world, from the school, university worlds, because they recognized in that report and in our industry some of the challenges that they also are facing. So we have the great pleasure of having an hour to talk about that report today with three people who know a lot about it. And on my far right is Amy O'Leary, who's worked at the Times for 7 years in a range of roles, from multimedia producer to digital editor to reporter, and is currently the paper's deputy editor for digital operations. Most recently, she was on the team that wrote the report that we're going to talk about today. Before coming to the Times, she worked in public radio as a producer for This American Life and produced stories for Radio Lab, On the Media, and others. Next to her is Tyson Evans, who is an editor on the newsroom strategy team at the Times. Previously, he was deputy editor of the Times Interactive News Desk, working with a team of developers to build data-driven web apps on deadline for everything from Olympics coverage to WikiLeaks data to coverage of Hurricane Sandy. He is also an adjunct professor at Columbia. And next to me, Alex McCallum, who is the first ever assistant managing editor of audience development at the Times. She was named to that position in August, and I think was the first appointment the new executive editor, Dean Baquet, made to the masthead. Previously, she worked in the product organization of the Times, managing the development of the company's new cooking app, which she thinks of as a model for how the Times can approach service journalism. So even though I think the report is fairly well known, we've asked Amy to spend a few minutes giving us the highlights of that work, which occupied many months of her life. And then I'll have a few questions for the three of them, and then we'll open it up to the audience more broadly. Amy?
Thanks very much for that introduction, Anne-Marie. So it's really good to be here with you today. I was one of the unfortunates that was in the airline mess this morning, and I'm really happy to be here and not up on a Skype screen. It's much better this way. And I'm also really happy to be talking to you about something I've spent the last year working on, which is the innovation report. But I wanted to start with the weirdness. So the weirdness started for me on May 15th of this year. So I was in Amsterdam at a conference not unlike this one, and after one session, I finished, I go outside, it's a beautiful day, and my phone buzzes, and I get this GChat notification from my neighbor, Zoe. She's a reporter at Newsweek, and she said, so Miles got a hold of your report. And I was like, wait, what? Miles was Miles Tanzer, the media reporter for BuzzFeed. And at this point, attached was a link, and it said, the headline, Exclusive Times Internal Report Painted Dire Digital Picture. That did not look good, it did not feel good, I was freaking out. It was this internal private report that we'd written for just a handful of top newsroom executives, had been leaked to the press and was being read all over the world, and now I'm gonna be completely honest with you guys, I have not even told any of my colleagues at the Times this yet. At this moment, I was like, shit, I'm gonna get fired. The months before this went out, Miles Tanzer, the media reporter at BuzzFeed, came to a party at my house with a bucket of Kentucky Fried Chicken, which, okay, that's fine. What was the question? I missed the question. Oh, I think it was extra tasty crispy, I don't know. But so then he and I tweeted about the Kentucky Fried Chicken, and I thought that oh shit, this is like a smoking gun. Someone's gonna find this tweet and put it together that Miles Tanzer and I had chicken together, and no one else in the innovation team had chicken with him, and so I must be the source of the leak, and I'm totally gonna get fired. So that was my initial paranoia, and I was freaking out in Amsterdam, and I calmed down a little and I started walking back to my hotel, but then this other emotion came over me, and this was really common to the 8 of us who worked closely on this report, which was this sort of awful, genuinely pit of the stomach, terrible feeling. Arthur Gregg Sulzberger, who led our innovation report team, he said that day took years off of his life, and I totally related. I mean, here we all were, we'd thrown ourselves into this work, and this institution that we love so much, that we spend so much time pouring ourselves into, we had built this candid, critical self-assessment with some of our most painful truths on display, and now our harshest critics, our strongest competitors, we're picking it apart. And I don't care who you are, that never feels good. It was just a really hard day. So not to mention that all this came just the day after the Times was going through, a little quiet leadership transition. There were a lot of things in the news, and it wasn't an easy week to be working at the Times. It definitely was not an easy week to be working at the Times in Amsterdam. Whew. So none of us on this team could have ever predicted how this 96-page document would be received in the coming days and weeks. We had no idea. Even internally, we were really unsure. So it was reassuring then when one of our most decorated investigative reporters, a 3-time Pulitzer Prize winner, David Barstow, told us, "This long version is an amazing document full of holy shit reporting that raises truly profound questions for the New York Times." Coming from him, that meant a great deal. And the response internally has been equally amazing. So today, we don't want to go back over all the nuts and bolts of the report itself. I know a lot of people have read it, and the Nieman Lab absolutely did a wonderful job summarizing it on their site. If you haven't spent time with that, I think it's absolutely the best summary out there. But very briefly, I'd just like to quickly review the report's purpose, its 5 main recommendations, and then sort of get back to discussion so we can all just talk about this. Because really, more than any specific idea in the report, what we found the most valuable part of this process has been the conversations it's unleashed. So it was actually about a year ago where this started. Jill Abramson, at the time, had asked Arthur Gregg Salzberger to form a small team from newsroom people to get together and think about what kind of new idea could the newsroom propose. We just recently had 3 big ideas come from our colleagues on our business side. We have the great NYT Now mobile app, and the great new cooking app, and a great new opinion app. And the thought was, the newsroom, we should take some time and step back and think of some big ideas on our own and dream big. The sky was the limit. So we spent the first 2 months thinking, okay, we're going to build another new product. That was what our mission started out as. And we interviewed dozens of readers. I mean, we called them all over the world. We went into their homes and videotaped them interacting with the Times. And we did all this research. We went through thousands and thousands of Post-it notes. We got high on Sharpie smell because it's all we were doing all day in this little room. But it became really clear over the course of these 2 months of work that, we could have a much greater impact simply by focusing on this core question. And rather than creating some new app over here, why not just think about how can we get more readers to read more of our journalism? So we went back to Jill and say, hey, we'd kind of like to pivot. We'd like a really different mission here. Can we look at that question instead? And she was 100% supportive. At that moment we came to her and asked to really change our mission. So what was that mission from that point? I think the most common thing people have misunderstood about the report is now that it's published and public, everyone thinks it was sort of meant to be this complete exhaustive exegesis on the entire state of the New York Times as a company. And it really wasn't. I mean, we were writing a persuasive document for just a handful of newsroom leaders. It wasn't really our role to examine the business model of the Times. We purposefully did not look at issues around, a subscription model or the paywall. And others have said that we were too hard on technology and we didn't critique the journalism enough. And this is why I think it's really important to understand that this was a persuasive document. We weren't trying to cover the universe with it. We were just trying to say that, hey, to our newsroom leaders, we wanted to urge them to use this moment to give particular consideration to some very important areas that had been under-considered and undervalued in a long-standing way. Our masthead has always thought hard and long and deeply about the quality of our journalism and our storytelling, but hadn't always given as much prominence to things like our CMS or analytics. So this was our opportunity to focus that spotlight on those issues. So our recommendations were 5. The first was about hiring, developing, and supporting digital talent that can help prepare the newsroom for the coming shifts in our operations as we become an increasingly digital organization. The second was to collaborate with non-newsroom departments that we call reader experience groups. Now, this recommendation has been interpreted as we want to tear down the wall of church and state between, the business side and the newsroom. That's not what we meant at all. We were talking about, we don't want any erosion of the traditional boundaries at the New York Times that have always prevented conflict of interest. So whether that's conflict of interest with advertising sales or with our opinion department, those structures are still very much in place. But we had these legacy walls that really weren't helping us. We weren't talking to our developers. We weren't talking to our product teams. We weren't talking to the people who do research with our customers, because by an accident of history, they ended up on the business side. We thought that didn't make any sense. So we encouraged to collaborate with those departments more regularly. The third recommendation was to embrace data and analytics in a way that sophisticatedly supports our journalistic mission, which is not something the Times had historically done. We were very kind of data shy for many years. The fourth was to create an audience development team, and that's really just to expand, our work with the art and science of reaching our readers and getting our journalism to them. And the fifth and final recommendation was, we would kind of look around in this room we were in and be like, the fact that you have to have an innovation committee means something is kind of off, right? And the fifth point was that we realized that any report or committee is just a one-time fix. And the way that our industry is changing and the speed at which it is changing requires that we constantly study what the next thing is. My favorite line in the whole report was one that said, we have to build the newsroom out of Legos and not bricks. So the fifth recommendation was the creation of a strategy team that would wrestle with these questions in an ongoing way. While the newsroom is busy putting out the daily report, we will always have people on hand thinking about the big picture questions. So that's why I'm so proud to be here with Alex and Tyson, because they are the living embodiment of two of our biggest recommendations. Alex is building out the audience development team as we speak, and Tyson is already working on the next phase of strategy for our newsroom. And in my current role, I'm working on a lot of small things here and there to implement parts of the report throughout the newsroom. And one of the things we were really excited about was we recently put out a newsroom survey, and over 200 of our colleagues wrote in to say they were willing to volunteer to do anything they could to help with these areas. There's just a tremendous, overwhelming amount of interest and support in our newsroom to move ahead on this. So with all that, I just want to thank you all for having us to talk about this today. I'm really interested to hear what you all think, and to turn it back over to Anne-Marie to ask us whatever you all would like to know. So thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Most people have a much better time when they go to Amsterdam, just by the way. You have to go back. In reading this report, I remember one of the flashbacks I had was to taking over a news organization and a friend of mine in the newsroom saying, so what do you think? And I said, I think I need to turn an ocean liner. And she said, no, you need to turn an ocean liner every day. And that's really hard. And when you read through the report, so much of it, and I'm sure now, to you, it was so familiar by the time it was published, but it just had the air of the obvious, a lot of it, right? There's nothing very radical in what you say. Why is it so hard?
Sure. Listen, for a lot of us who've been working in digital news for a long time, there wasn't that much in terms of the report's recommendations that was crazy revelatory or revolutionary, right? A lot of us sort of knew these things and been trying to push the boulder of change up the Sisyphusian hill that is, the news industry for many years. So to me, part of it's hard is because you're basically, a newsroom is a machine. It's like a factory that is cranking out journalism every day. And you get people who are really good at the habits involved in cranking out high-quality journalism. But it's really difficult to use a factory and then rearrange the factory equipment at the same time. And that's basically why the struggle has been so difficult. One of the reasons that the report, I think, resonated so much inside of our newsroom is because it spoke to the language of the people in the newsroom. There's a crazy amount of reporting in this that we didn't even use. There was just reams and reams of interviews and data. And I think when people in the newsroom saw that work behind it, it wasn't just, Amy recommended we do X. It was no, we did tons of research and then we recommended X. That carried this extra weight where people were willing to sort of pause from their hard work at the machine, step back a little and think, oh wait, maybe we need to move the furniture around and try something new.
One of the, which I know at the Times was a more difficult subject to broach, was this idea of the wall, and I don't mean the paywall. The report says, the very first step about increased collaboration should be a deliberate push to abandon our current metaphors of choice. The Wall, Church and State, which project an enduring need for division. Increased collaboration done right does not present any threat to our values of journalistic independence. I'm imagining that that was a difficult sentence to write. It probably didn't just get written on its own and fly into the final draft, that was much debated. The two of you are examples of that sort of coming to life in some ways as a result of the report. And I'm just wondering if you could sort of take us inside that conversation, how hard it was for the Times to say something that frankly a lot of other news organizations had gotten to already, and then how you've experienced that change on a day-to-day basis.
Sure. I mean, I can start by saying, I came from, a technology group inside the company, and when I first started 6 years ago, this anecdote that's been retold a couple times was, I had to actually fight to be able to go to the orientation program that the newsroom puts on, because that wasn't the group that usually goes through the newsroom orientation program, even though I was sitting in the newsroom, reporting up through newsroom editors. And so there's all these little small paper cuts that ended up creating this culture where there were a lot of people who were just as passionate about our readers and our journalism as David Barstow was, or as Dean would be, who ended up getting marginalized, even though we moved all into the same building. Adding a couple elevator rides between you and somebody who really does thoughtful research about our readers in a big organization, it was hard to break down those walls. And I think since the report, and kind of already in motion since then, has been a lot of really clear indicators that things are changing. Alex coming over from the product side. We had Andrew Phelps move from the newsroom to the mobile product world. And I think we're seeing a tremendous amount of cross-pollination in those worlds right now.
And I would just say, even as of a year ago, I was paired with Sam Sifton to work, who's the food editor of the Times, to work on the new cooking product. And we had a design lead, a technology lead. Sam and myself spent the last year developing it with obviously a bigger team, but leads from each group. And so we already had started to break down some of the walls as an experiment. And to Amy's point, it's really just walls around people thinking about the reader and the user. The wall still stands between the newsroom and advertising, and the newsroom and editorial.
I wanted to ask about something that's not in the report, and I'm not sure a lot of people understand this, but there was at least one instance in the course of working on this where the newsroom decided to proceed on a certain front, and so having the sense that that was being addressed, it does not show up in a really fulsome way in the report, and that was this whole area of analytics, particularly editors and reporters understanding what their audience was for their work. I think it came up in a preliminary presentation to Dean, Dean Baquet, the now executive editor of the paper, the then managing editor, who said, I want to get to work on this right away. And so there'd been the culture at the Times where you could certainly see what the most emailed stories were and what sort of the reaction was on social media and elsewhere, but you didn't really deeply understand who'd read your story. Editors didn't deeply understand that, but knew a little bit more about it. Can you talk about how you're thinking about analytics now, which I think is still in a somewhat tiered way, editor-reporter, and I think that the term of art has become that this isn't about clicks, but it's about a story finding its maximum natural audience. What does that mean?
Well, okay, so a little bit of background. In all the research we did, the Times was certainly, out of all the large newsrooms we looked at, we were using data and analytics the least, which is to say almost not at all. We've had Chartbeat on our homepage for a little while for a small group of users for a few years, but beyond that, there really wasn't much other deep use of analytics in the newsroom. And part of this came out of decisions that were made a long time ago that made total sense back when they were made. I mean, when I joined the Times in 2007, we were proud that we are not click-driven in the New York Times newsroom. We care about the journalism and we don't have to worry about getting a certain number of clicks. But at the same time back then, when we were kind of eschewing data as a potential evil to pollute our news organization, that was about all the data that there was. It was kind of like clicks and visitors and page views. And part of what we said in our recommendation in the report was we're very interested in a more sophisticated use of data to support our journalistic mission. And what we did in those 2 months of research, we did about 2 months of research on analytics in particular, and we looked at all these other types of things that we can measure on a much broader palette of things that do really reflect what we're trying to do with our journalism. And once we showed that palette, like I actually drew up little pictures of different kinds of analytics with a Sharpie and showed them to every department head in the newsroom and was like, what would you think about this? Would you find this useful? And we did a lot of research and basically came to the conclusion that there are so many ways that analytics would be hugely helpful to our newsroom's mission, and that's where we wanted to go with it. I think, Alex, can you talk a little bit about where you're taking it?
Yeah, so analytics is going to be part of the audience team. I mean, broadly, the audience team is really tasked with helping the newsroom understand our audience, and analytics is a big part of that. We're actually really lucky to, in print, you couldn't actually have as detailed information about what people are doing, the behaviors they're engaging in. And so that obviously happens on a story-by-story level, but even helping the newsroom understand broader trends, so the huge shift to mobile and how rapid that's becoming, thinking about time of day that people are interested in different types of stories, thinking about how our subscribers behave. We have this huge subscription base, which we're so lucky to have, versus people who just come for one story and then leave. There's all sorts of things that we are going to look at as part of this team and really help the newsroom, give them the tools to start understanding themselves.
A/B testing, I think, is part of that.
Arthur has said this a few times, but just the Times is going to start getting comfortable testing even the concept of A/B testing potentially on a small portion of our audience.
We actually did run a sample A/B test during the course of the report, just to be like, oh, this is what you would learn from it. There was a science article, and we put 2 different photos and 2 slightly different headlines. They were, Times photos, Times headlines, and, we just wanted to sort of play around. Well, is this something that people would find useful?
And one of the things that just, I think all of us at the Times are very much against clickbait and leaving a fact out of a headline that it forces somebody to click on something. That said, there's ways to frame something. In digital, people need to take an action to actually read a story. They either need to click on it or tap on it. And framing it so that it's clear what's on the other end of that action is important. And so we're trying to, A/B testing isn't always a bad thing. And we're going to be
In fact, it can be a really great thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's where we're to me, one of the most awesome things that's happened in the newsroom since the innovation report was leaked is that it feels like finally there's just this room to have these big, honest conversations about stuff. Honestly, if you brought up A/B testing a couple years ago, your hand might have gotten smacked. But now you can let's have a thoughtful conversation about it. Let's bring in some experts on A/B testing and multi-arm bandit testing and figure out what we want to do, if anything, with those. And to me, that openness is the key thing, because whatever, as long as we're willing to investigate these things and figure out how it would work for us or not work for us, that feels to me like we're having that honest conversation with ourselves, and the work of the innovation report is continuing.
The sense I have from talking to people who worked on this is somebody would have preferred to leak it, but in general, most people didn't want it public. But having been made public, there was an eventual sort of embrace of that, and you all saw that a lot of benefits came from that. So on this point of openness, can you imagine going forward that you would rethink the way you talk to the public about what you're working on? Can you imagine releasing public information about how the analytics project is going, opening this up to the industry in a fuller way?
I think that's one of those healthy conversations we're having right now. We've been talking about different ways we can communicate, and Alex and I were just talking the other week, maybe we should have an external-facing blog that talks about all the experiments we're running. And again, we haven't figured exactly out what all those strategies are, but I think, again, it feels like now everything is on the table. And that's what I'm glad for, that we can actually say, oh wait, maybe we should just be a lot more open.
One of the areas of great criticism in the report is the way, and I think this is true of a lot of newsrooms, but the extent to which the Times, the daily structure is so focused on the page 1 meeting. There's a very critical assessment from someone in the Washington Bureau who says, our internal fixation on it can be unhealthy, disproportionate, and ultimately counterproductive. just think about how many points in our day are still oriented around A1, and goes on to detail, starting with the 10 a.m. meeting. You hear that a lot, and it seems like such a simple thing to address. Why is that such a challenge for newsrooms all these years into, post-Gutenberg and wherever we end up? Why is that still so hard?
Well, I think that page one is like the most compact, efficient metaphor for something we really want to keep, which is this like high quality and this high focus on, when the collective editing brain of the New York Times is like, these set of stories are our most important stories for the day. It's a really powerful and important exercise. It elevates everybody's game. Like trying to get a story on page one makes you a better reporter. You will dig harder for like that great quote with the hope of it getting on page one. So there's like a real strong functionality to that hugely powerful center of gravity, which is page one. That's why it's hard just to like stop doing it, because there are all these incentives in place. Now, to me, the interesting thing, and one of the things we worked on a lot in our analytics research for the report, was trying to figure out, well, what other kinds of incentives, like what other things can we develop for people that are going to have the same kind of power and allure as being on page one? What is the equivalent of that in the digital age? And I think, we don't fully know what that is yet, but maybe it's analytics, maybe it's something else. But I feel like that idea that the newsroom is getting together and having this robust conversation about what is our best work is almost more important now that we're in this kind of diffuse stage where we have to decide where we spend this audience development resource, where we like put effort on our biggest stories. And so the reason it stayed with us so long is because it's really useful. And I think the reason we haven't shed kind of a page one hyper focus is because we haven't figured out the right smart thing to morph it into.
I'll just add, I think one of the things that's happening in this, at least internal transparency moment for us, is you see reporters' eyes like almost bulge out of their heads when you tell them, page one is great. You know what's even greater? A mobile push alert. It's going to see several orders of magnitude more readers. You're going to literally make people's legs vibrate with your news. Like, that's how amazing, that's how key a scoop that goes to a mobile push alert is. And you can actually just see the gears turning in a reporter's head being like, oh, whoa, I've totally miscalibrated my sense of vanity here. Like, that's what I need to target.
I just want to give people notice. I'm going to open it up to questions shortly. I think there's a microphone over there and one over there. So if you have questions and want to get in line to ask them, that would be great. I'm wondering what were the most, internally within the newsroom, and not, people really love this and thought it was, important and it's bringing about important change. What were the reactions that were the most surprising and tell you and demonstrate in some way how much work there still is left to do on this front? And as you talk about that, how have you, as people are now coming to the Times and asking questions about this work for their own institutions, be they news organizations or libraries or museums, what advice are you giving people about how to navigate these waters?
Do you want to talk about the audience development? Well, I can talk to just the audience development. So I think one of the interesting things for me coming from, I've only been at the Times for a year and a half, which for the Times is actually a pretty short amount of time. And there's a lot of things not happening in the newsroom that are potentially digital oriented that the Times arguably would need to catch up on. That said, the Times is so far ahead in terms of this subscription model, and even to the homepage meeting, like people come back to the Times homepage because there's obviously huge value in the journalism, the reporting, and the editing, but also the Times curating that experience for you. And that's really valuable for our readers. So anyway, so the Times has been a pioneer, and I hope it continues to be a pioneer in that area, but it's been interesting to see that there's all sorts of things that reader-oriented things that the Times hasn't really been thinking about in the newsroom. Yeah.
I was just going to say that the hardest thing has actually been the fact that the report was leaked before we had these teams in place to handle people's questions. So like everybody in the newsroom read it, and we actually did, the team that worked on it, we gave 40-hour-long presentations to every group at the company who wanted one, and we answered their questions. And by far, the biggest set of questions was, how can I, I'll, extract from a lot of different questions. They're like, what are the best audience development strategies for my story that's running tomorrow? Like, everybody just wanted to know that, right? And we were always in this awkward position of like, okay, we would have really liked you to read this report when we had Alex and her team in place to answer that question, because I'm not qualified, I'm not an expert in that, I don't know what it is. No one on our team really was an expert. We ran some experiments, but that was the gap we were caught in. It was like this 6-month kind of lacuna where we didn't really have all the answers, but there was this crazy, like, rabid amount of enthusiasm and interest on these topics. And so managing that energy has been, I think, one of our biggest challenges.
And I'll add that I think it also, in the eye-opening sense, made people realize, the Times is a big place, so I think the natural assumption is like, oh, that's someone else's job. Someone else is worrying about audience development. Someone else is worrying about the reader experience on mobile, or the subscription flow, or habit formation, all these things. And I think this kind of made people realize that, like, oh no, actually I should have opinions about that. My opinions need to find an outlet, and I can actually participate in the process of fixing some of these things. I think there was so many assumptions that things were running on autopilot somewhere else in the building that now I think people smartly realize, like, no, actually, if I think there's a better way to make this process happen, then I can, like, raise my hand.
One of the things that comes out of it is, and I hear this a lot from, I have Nieman Fellows, come to Harvard from all over the world, and the profound sense of estrangement that a lot of reporters have from what is happening, in the larger corpus. And just the sense, well, there must be a strategy, and even when there is, that it's just not communicated to them. So given the size of the organization, which hasn't changed, it's more or less what it was when the report was issued, and I know, Amy, you've done 40-ish presentations around the company about the report. So, and we've talked about a specific, couple of projects here, like dining. But what are you doing on a day-to-day basis to communicate what actually is happening? You talk about developing toolkits. How integrated is that now, desk by desk? Because it's a daily communications process, and I'm wondering how good the paper is at that now.
We're not there yet. We're getting there. It's all kinds of things, right? It's everything from, it was great today. Dean McKay sent out a really lovely email about all the wonderful progress that had been made with the cooking app and watching, and just, from that most senior level of communication to, little things like when you're having a hallway conversation with someone explaining, oh, hey, we had this amazing success with this video where we got it, this is actually a great story. We had this amazing success with this video. I don't know if you guys saw this. There was this video about a man who escaped an ISIS massacre, right? We had this exclusive video from it. And this was one of these examples. And this story has ricocheted around the newsroom, in a way, it's these examples that travel far and do well for us. So in this case, what happened was we knew we had this exclusive video of this guy, and this cross-departmental team got together, you guys, you can talk a little bit to this, of, we had people from marketing and PR and video and the foreign desk, and they were all talking about, we had this great exclusive, classic New York Times piece of news. How do we get it to reach its maximum natural audience, or the most people who are interested in it? So they did some really innovative things. We had a full Arabic translation for it. We had a social media campaign timed to the Arabic language world's morning. We had partnerships for distribution with places like YouTube and the Young Turks and Dig. The video itself got something like 50 times the viewership of a typical New York Times video, and that's what we believe in. This is the core journalism that we all live for, that we're there to do. And so when you have a story like this, where you can say, hey guys, this really vital piece of journalism did really, really well because we all worked together in this new way, that's, I think, going to be more transformative than any kind of lectures or brown bags or training sessions, and that's what we're going for.
It's interesting to hear you talk about that, because it reminds me of a point in the report that talks about how the organization is incredibly excellent at executing on these, at these moments. but there's that really interesting passage where you're talking about snowfall, and you quote somebody outside the organization saying, you're talking about how episodic sometimes these successes can be, and the observation is, yeah, but I'd rather be the place that built the architecture for the snowfalls, not the snowfall. So you have an example like that, but how institutionalized can you make this work now?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things with the audience development team. We really hope to be transformative and a little bit work ourselves out of a job. So in order to be successful, all of this needs to be a newsroom education effort and embraced by the newsroom and then kind of done by the newsroom. And I think that people, to Amy's point, people are so excited. The innovation report has really changed the way that people are thinking about this in the newsroom, and they're really happy, eager, and really interested in helping. So I hope that that can really be.
Yeah. And on the tool building side, like I made the joke the other day, this kind of felt like the summer of the CMS in a way. Like it was just like everybody wanted to talk about the CMS, which is, as a nerd, it was awesome. You're like, whoa, where were you like 4 years ago when we were all geeking out about these questions? But the upside of that is now people are actually invested and have opinions about what tools they want in their hands. And I think the experiments you guys did during the report itself, which was trying these new things of collections and better ways to surface our content, or trying to find ways to make quizzes, or really immense and immersive narrative storytelling more easily done. Like those are all things that are in progress and that have all been ratcheted up, I think, because everyone is like cheerleading for it now.
All right, let's open it up to questions from you all. So I'll just go side to side. And if you could just tell us who you are before you ask your question so they know who they're responding to. Go ahead.
David Clinch from Storyful. And first of all, we were very proud to help your team on that ISIS survivor story, which was fantastic. But my question is provocative. I was talking to a newspaper person recently, and I was asking them what digital first was, and they basically said that digital first was publishing at 3 o'clock in the afternoon instead of publishing at 10 o'clock at night, which shows, my question is, do you try and change everything at the same time? Do you try and change a newspaper business into a digital media business, or do you keep running the newspaper and the newspaper business and basically start a digital news business almost from scratch, from within, with sort of startups from within? Are you trying to do it all at the same time and move everybody, or basically keep the ship going and do, start again from scratch?
Yeah, so the newspaper business is still core to the New York Times. It's, we have a huge, thinking about our readers, we have a huge audience of readers who love the print paper and subscribe to it and pay for it. In addition to that, it's actually where 75% of the Times revenue comes from. And so there's, that's not going away anytime soon, and we really value those readers. We need to figure out how to do, to your point, not just have digital first be publishing at 3 p.m., but have it be the whole newsroom thinking about digital storytelling and kind of digital first thinking in everything, and maybe, mobile first thinking, like all of the different trends and platforms as part of people's jobs. I don't know, yeah, and Amy and Tyson have been in the newsroom far longer than I have.
I mean, to actually do the change, like we can't stop doing print right now, to Alex's point, right? But that's always been the trick, right? How do you keep, sort of cranking out, like the factory, you're cranking out this, beautiful, brilliant print thing every day that's amazing, and then also like invent a new group and like invent new products and new ways to communicate. And I think we found the most success with this is we've started to have these teams. When there's something new that is created, a team is created, whether it was for cooking or NYT Now, or even for our new blog, The Upshot, right? There's a team of people that kind of work in a silo together in a cross-functional way that then have the freedom to kind of innovate in their area. And I think, this is sort of like having little incubators around, right? We're still putting out the paper every day, but we've got all these little interesting experiments now. If you look all over the site, things like watching on the homepage, the first draft, which is our new Washington kind of tip sheet presentation. It's, to me, again, what's great is if you have this culture where you've got a lot of experiments going on, then the kind of winners can grow into what your newsroom becomes in the future.
One just addition to that, also, like it's a little bit easier for the NYT Now team or the cooking team to do this stuff because it's digital only. And so our challenge is to take the learnings that we've had from these different projects and apply them to the broader newsroom.
Yes. Hi, I'm Kara Swisher. I wanted to know, it's interesting because I was just listening to you talk about the word innovation, which is always means there's a problem. But you were saying, I just tweeted, I'm really sorry for doing this, but I did. It said, listening to the New York team talk about its 96-page innovation report and wondering why it needed 96 pages to grok itself. Hashtag kids love the internets, please. ONH14. But what I was thinking, and you said it yourself, if you need an innovation committee, something's gone awry. Where do you see the problem in terms of correcting it? And what do you imagine will happen from your report? Because a lot of these reports sort of die, like something doesn't happen. And I was just, for example, noticing that Dean Bacat, last time he tweeted, and I'm not saying Twitter's the way you notice things, was June 14th. So what happens? Is it the leadership? Is it the reporters? Is it resistance? And how do you imagine something happening? Because it doesn't. I mean, I've worked at newsrooms and escaped, but how does it happen? Like, where does innovation, like real innovation, come from your perspective?
That's a great question. I mean,
By the way, the dude who said the buzzing mobile thing, I'd hire you tomorrow. But anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's you.
The buzzing mobile alert. That's
Right,
brilliant.
right. So it's a really good question, right? How do you get the change to stick? How do you get it to happen? And, I mean, I told you all that, we wrote this as a persuasive document. One of the things that, I will confess that we wrote on the whiteboard when we were talking about, like, how do we kick this off was, I remember writing the word fear on the whiteboard and being like, okay, like, you have to have some mixture of, like, fear and, like, hope, right, to motivate change. And I think, one of the reasons we felt that it was really important to, be really direct and, like, candid and self-critical was we wanted to elevate the urgency of these changes. And I mean, it's sort of like, I don't know, it's like, it's like climate change or turning up the water on the lobster, right? Like, if we're not sort of aware that there's a crisis here, people aren't motivated to act, because the biggest crisis in a newsroom is always the biggest story. And so how do you, like, snap people's heads out of the story they're working on to focus on, well, maybe you need to change, like, again, move the furniture around or, like, retool the factory. So there are a couple reasons why I think this moment, A, has stuck so far, and B, will continue to have resonance in our newsroom going forward. I think, one, to be very honest, I think a lot of people in the newsroom, took note of the lead author on the team as part of the family that owns the newspaper, so I think that had a lot to do with it, in terms of people trying to sort of say, okay, well, and this was not how we looked at it at all. We were like a team of reporters, but I think, to be very honest, that was part of why some people took more note of the report.
Scared of the rich people.
What?
Scared of rich people.
No, not to scare the rich people, to tell the newsroom, to say, like, guys, this is urgent. Right now we have to focus on this. And that's why there's some pretty, if you look on, like, the second page, there are numbers about, like, our homepage traffic that are not, like, pleasant to read if you work, in the newsroom. And that was there because we wanted to get people's attention, right? Like, it is hard to do this stuff. And if you say that everything's fine, then people say, great, everything's fine, I don't have to change. But if you, present in a really candid, well-reported, deep way that, hey, we're in an industry that's changing and our newsroom is not changing as fast as it needs to, then people pay attention and they get really invested. And I think we've just seen that, I mean, listen, everyone in the newsroom that I've talked to in all these presentations have been completely motivated. Like, everyone wants the times to figure this stuff out, and everyone wants to pitch in. And I think we've seen a really, tremendous response to that, because no one had the time to step back and look at these problems.
I still am asking, where does it start? Because, like, why don't people in the newsroom know that everybody comes in from the sides? No one goes to a homepage.
Because we weren't sharing analytics.
Right, but who
That's-
does that? But who is the leader that does that? That's all I want to, where is the leadership problem in that regard? Because all my staff knows, I almost want to kill our homepage, like who cares? Like nobody comes in through there, it's like 2% or whatever. So who teaches those people that it comes in like that? It's a little thing like that that's critically important.
Sure. I mean, I think, just the creation of the team. I mean, that was Jill Abramson showing that she knew that she wanted, that she felt the newsroom, had a larger role to play in our innovative efforts.
Got it, but she got fired, so who?
Right. And both Jill and Dee McKay were completely supportive of our work throughout the entire process. And I think that, again, just seeing that Alex McCallum is here and on our masthead, it's such an unusual, Alex is a wonderful new addition to our leadership, and I think that speaks volumes about kind of the direction that our newsroom is headed in. But really, it comes down to the commitment of everybody from the top to the bottom. It's not just a leader. It's everyone from like the newest intern, to the copy editor that's been there for 30 years and knows everything about the place, to, a foreign correspondent who is barely in the newsroom. And one of the things that I think was really transformative about this report was that it was universally read by everyone who works at the Times, and now we all are kind of starting from this one moment together.
Yes?
Hi, I'm Jeff Jarvis, your neighbor at next door at the CUNY Journalism School. One of the things that impressed me most about, to follow up on the previous two questions, one of the things that impressed me most about the report was its blunt definition of digital first, which also implies print last. It implies print as a byproduct. It implies a question of whether print, right? But forget about print for a moment. It also then goes beyond that to ask the greater existential question of, why are we here? What is journalism? What is the Times? What is its relationship with the public it serves that's more than an audience to develop? That's a public to serve. So what I'm curious about, and the report wasn't aimed at that, I know, because you were talking about innovation in the newsroom, but what was the discussion in those rooms with those Post-its and those fumes of the larger question about what the Times' relationship is with its public, what the Times means, where it's going? Was there that discussion about what are we past print and post-Gutenberg or not?
The first 2 months we talked about almost everything. I wasn't joking about the thousands and thousands of Post-it notes. We really bounced crazy things off the wall about, all kinds of ways the newsroom and our journalism could look. But we didn't go very deeply with those discussions because, again, I think we thought that our biggest impact was really in a focus on how, again, we have this wealth of journalism every day. I think we publish, over 300 URLs a day of journalism. And we just felt like there was so much we could do by having that journalism reach farther than it currently does. So while those were certainly discussed, we didn't do like a deep dive on that question. But to your first point, we very much did consider digital first to be publications that, we talked specifically about the FT and USA Today as publications that, everyone is writing for their digital audience. At the end of the day, a small team sort of, packages the report for print. And that remains, when we talk about an eventual transition to digital first in our newsroom, it's not about publishing at 3 p.m., but it's that kind of infrastructure challenge, which is a big one for any large newspaper.
I still want to question for just 1 second this idea of the audience, and Alex, I'm glad you're doing what you're doing in the newsroom, but your title of audience development is still awfully media-centric. It's still enough about you. Have you seen my stuff today? How do you like my stuff? Come see our stuff. And so, is there an opportunity to go beyond that idea of the public as audience in what you're trying to do, and do the metrics you're going to bring to the newsroom help inform a different relationship with that public?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple things. One, just to the broad point of understanding trends and understanding our audience. So as people move to mobile, as people move to coming in through side doors, making sure we're aware of those trends broadly throughout the newsroom and the organization, and then also kind of acting on them and making sure we're part of that. But just to your point about, I think a huge, exciting part of this team, it's growing our audience, but it's also engaging our audience and really making them part of our conversation as we're thinking about, and this is probably going to be down the line, but as we're thinking about stories and who's going to read these stories, how are they going to have an impact? And it isn't just about reach, it's about a lot of other things.
And I would say, I think you know, if you saw the announcement about the night collaboration with Mozilla and the Washington Post and the Times, I mean, you look at a series like Lydia Rosenthal's been doing over the last year with, you know, the cost of medical procedures in the U.S. I mean, that was a series that was entirely done kind of hand in hand with, you know, reader-driven reporting, sourcing, you know, kind of patchwork reporting to find these stories that can then get weaved together into the kind of the classic NYT narrative. And there's been a ton of those examples at the Times. And I think the question for us now is like, how do we balance the question of reach and finding audience with also realizing that those people are partners on a lot of these projects and are going to be the ones contributing to the reporting, but also helping us discover the things elsewhere on the web that we need.
Yes.
David Scott from the Boston Globe. I get to be the guy that follows Jeff Jarvis and Kara Swisher, so let's hope for the best. You know, I want to touch on process, and one of the things that you skimmed on it very briefly was A/B testing. And when you look at what the process and culture is of putting a newspaper out every day, it's a very congealed process, and when it's done, and you move on to the next day and start anew. Whereas with engineering and product and that world, it's very much about iterative, agile development and continuing to test on what we do. And I find that the nexus of that challenge, at least in the newsroom side of the culture, is having the reporters grasp that notion that what they're putting out may not necessarily be the finished product, but kind of part of our ongoing grand experiment. And I'm curious how that works in your report, and how you thought about how you would approach that from the newsroom standpoint about these kind of clash of two processes and culture.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the last big initiatives we've done, everything from First Draft, NYT Now, Watching, The Upshot, I mean, these are all teams that I think very much expect the medium and the format of what they're doing day in and day out to be a work in progress. That they know that they have a feedback loop where if they want to make the experience, the CMS, the tools, the presentation, all those things are up for grabs, and they know that, and they have the confidence that if they have a way to tweak them, they can, and they can balance the kind of the journalistic act alongside the kind of product mentality of shaping it, you know, day in, day out. And I think that balance is what we want to try to make happen throughout the newsroom.
I think if I can, Emery, just on that note, I mean, these are separate, almost separate units as you talked about, and I completely get that. I think that the challenge that our organizations have is getting the existing team of reporters who are predominantly thinking about print-centric deadlines, how do they transition into this iterative process?
Well, I think the model of The Upshot is a great one because, you know, a lot of their work ends up in print, but they're kind of, you know, again, this sort of interesting incubator space where, you know, there's room to do some different things, and they have the freedom to experiment, and then, you know, the best stuff that also works in print makes it into print. And, you know, I think it's really hard to say, serve two masters, two incentive systems, you know, two deadline structures at the same time. But I think you can create pockets where people have the freedom to like learn another way of working, and then that can spread throughout the newsroom.
I have one last question, and I'd like for each of you to answer it. One of the things that the report addresses, you interview people who left the Times because of their frustration with the work. And the report says the Times doesn't offer much of a career path for people working on the digital side in the newsroom. And many staffers feel like their skills are either undervalued or misunderstood. I'm curious for each of you, what has to happen at the Times to keep you engaged and to keep you there?
I've obviously been so lucky at the Times in terms of a career path, so I think, and I hope that it's an indicator that the masthead really does care about digital people, and that they're excited and willing to promote them when they, you know, when they've proven themselves in some other part of the organization. I also think just from moving from product and then having Andrew Phelps move to product, there's more opportunities now to move around the organization to develop new skills that, you know, are a cross between storytelling, analytics, product development, technology, design-led thinking. There's a range of skills that people can develop within the organization, and the more fluidity we have, the better, and it's already starting to happen.
And I'll say from a position of someone who was trying to recruit a lot of developers mostly that wouldn't otherwise have seen a career path for themselves at the Times and could easily go to Google or Facebook or somewhere else and have a more traditional technology-driven career path. The thing that the Times does so well and has done for so long is offer a really eclectic pathway system for its people. You take somebody like Sam Sifton, who has had so many, like 9 lives at the Times, and done great in all of them, and we have to find templates for those same kind of roles, but for people with different skill sets. And the kind of like the classic Apple slide of the intersection signs of technology and the humanities, like the Times, I think, has a very similar structure there, where we can tell people, we're using both halves of your brain here as a developer, and that's certainly what I felt in my time there, that you're excelling because you're working at the intersection of these two spaces, and I think the leadership is seeing an opportunity to say, now we understand how to move you through the kind of full spectrum of the place.
Yeah, and I would just add that I was brought into the Times at a time when there were probably about like 40 or 50 digital journalists brought in all at once by Jim Roberts, who I think is here, and brought in this great cast of people. And when I look around, and a good chunk of those people left and went elsewhere, and we interviewed some of them in the report. But when I look around today at the Times and where they all are, they're all over the place. And I mean, myself, I've been in the Times 7 years. I've had 7 different jobs. And I've gotten to do a crazy, like, interesting range of things. And when I see that someone like Alex is put in such a senior leadership position, it just gives me a lot of hope and optimism that, like, there are going to be paths for all these people. I'm often asked to talk to younger digital journalists in the newsroom about career development, and I say, we're not talking about roles here. It's not like you're going to be a reporter and then or a copy editor and a backfield editor and then a department head and then the executive editor. There's no path like that anymore. What the paths are is a collection of skills that are totally fluid, that you can reapply to a brand new thing that we're inventing, like watching or the upshot, or you can use to create your own thing. I mean, I can't predict what my job will be next year, or probably even in 3 months or 3 years. But I do know that there's certain things that I can do that the Times has allowed me to develop, and that's what I think is so interesting about it.
Alex and Tyson and Amy, thank you so much. I know that you can quote this report in your sleep by now, and that it was your idea to come here today and to talk about this, which I think was, for something that I know has been a bit of a fatigue for all of you, was very generous. So thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.